Welcome back to the Casual Watch Review channel. Today we are reviewing the Luminox Pacific Diver 3137. This is the second Luminox we have reviewed on the channel, the first being the Navy SEALs Gold Edition. I'll leave a link to that one in the description. As that watch was inspired by the Navy, I interviewed a friend of mine who is a naval aviator and got his opinion on Luminox watches. I won't be covering any of the military aspects of this watch, even though Luminox has associated themselves with the military and first responders with other watches. This watch is not particularly aimed at those use cases, I think. And please check out that other review if you are interested in the background Luminox has in those areas, and let me know what you think in the comment section of this one. So briefly, who are Luminox? Luminox Watch Company is a US company founded in 1989 and headquartered in San Rafael, California. In 2006, a 50% stake in Luminox was purchased by Swiss brand Mondaine. You may have seen my recent review of their iconic Swiss Railways watch. This partnership means that modern Luminox watches now carry the Swiss-made text on their dials. The Pacific Diver differs from what most people think of Luminox watches in that this one is a full metal case. It is more of a refined version of their rugged Carbonox watches, so could easily be worn in a number of situations, from mountain climbing to maybe a business meeting. There's a lot to like with this version, but also a few big things I think we need to discuss, primarily around if this watch is good value. More on that later. There is no getting around it, this watch is larger. The bracelet is a whopping 24mm, something you don't often see on sports watches. Having said that, the watch itself is thin at 12mm and also very lightweight at only 176 grams. It's surprisingly comfortable due to how the bracelet articulates at the lugs. I think you could easily get away with this if you had a 6.5 to 7 inch wrist, and here you can see it on my 7.2 inch wrist. Of course, if you have a larger wrist, you're going to have no problem pulling this one off. Let's look at those stats before we start the review. 44mm case, a water resistance of 200 meters, case is 316L stainless steel as you'd expect. The bezel is a unidirectional bezel made of their Carbonox material, sapphire crystal with anti-reflective coating, a height of 12mm and a lug to lug of 51mm. The case of the watch is well machined. The flat case back really adds to the comfort of this watch. We can see some polishing on the lugs, but overall the watch is brushed. Brushing can cover a multitude of sins, so it's a good choice for a rugged watch. The crown is nicely recessed into the case and very well executed. It looks well protected and is nicely engraved with the Luminox logo. I personally really like the Luminox logo. I think it looks a lot better than the Tag Heuer logo, which follows a similar shape. The bracelet is nicely machined and very comfortable. Two areas I think could be better. The first being the clasp. This is just okay for a $700 watch, as this watch has a 200-meter water resistance. Maybe a dive extension would be nice, and also it's nice to use a dive extension on a hot day just to expand the bracelet on your wrist. The second is the way the bracelet interfaces with the watch. The bracelet is just a straight end 24mm. The watch has no fitted end links. I personally think it would look better with fitted end links. Also, the lugs are shorter, so getting a thicker dive strap on like an ISO frame I think would be a real struggle. Also, 24mm straps in general are just not as ubiquitous as 22 or 20mm, so it will limit your choice on third-party straps like NATO's, etc. The dial for me is a big draw of this watch, highly legible and features a very well executed sunburst. The green captures the light and honestly looks awesome. You will have no problems reading the time quickly on this watch. All hands feature tritium tubes, even on the second hand. Let's talk about the Loom for a second, because it is using tritium tubes. Typically on watches we see on the channel, the Loom is phosphorescence. This watch is powered by a patented Luminox light technology, which consists of tritium tubes that are precisely placed on the dial hands and bezel. The tubes enable full light visibility and hold a lifespan of 25 years. That's their full lifespan, but tritium does have a half-life, so expect after 13 years for it to be half as bright and then fully depleted at the 25-year mark. The tritium doesn't glow as bright quite as phosphorescent as Loom, but it's constantly glowing. It doesn't need to be charged by light whatsoever. The dial is highly legible, but for the price this watch retails at, I think you could expect a little bit more detail, like maybe applied indices and maybe more refined hands. For the hands, their design choices might be limited to accommodate the tritium tubes, but the hands feel less refined than on a marathon watch, and of course less refined than ball watches, who really experiment with tritium tube technology more than anyone else, I would say. The dial is framed by a Carbonox bezel. It feels nice and precise when turning. Carbonox is Luminox's proprietary material they use for cases and bezels of their other models. Luminox says it consists of carbon powder in varying percentages depending on the watch model. It feels like a resin mixed with carbon or a super strong plastic. The bezel has a great grip and tritium on top. Overall, I really like the execution of this watch. But now it is time to discuss a few things that I don't love about this watch, and honestly, I keep asking myself if this watch is good value at $695. I'll let you decide, but here are my thoughts. So let's start with the box. It comes in this Pelican style box, which looks very sturdy, but it actually isn't that sturdy. The box even broke when they shipped it to me on one of the hinges here. It feels quite cheap, honestly. I think they could have licensed Pelican to make these watch boxes. The watch box I had on the Navy SEALs Gold Edition, that was much better and it was smaller, so you could easily use it for something else. I argued you could use it for a small first aid kit or keeping other watches and straps in, whereas the size of this box would make it a little bit awkward to keep in a bag. So it looks the business, but it's really not that well made, unfortunately. I mentioned the overall build quality of the watch is great, but there are some QC issues on this particular one. As you can see here, there are tiny white flecks on the underside of the crystal. They're not visible with the naked eye, so I'm inclined to give it a pass, but again, for $700, you probably expect better. The clasp is also very basic. It does the job, but it doesn't look like it belongs on a $700 watch, more like a $300 watch. But honestly, the movement for me is the real letdown. The watch uses a Ronda 515. This is a very basic quartz movement. That doesn't mean it's bad. Far from it, it's used in millions of quartz watches. But you would expect better in a watch of this cost. You can buy a Ronda 515 movement on its own for $11, so with Luminox's economies of scale, they're probably paying half that. They could have updated with a Ronda 715, which is a gold-plated 5 jewel movement with extended battery life at 60 months, or even the bigger 715 Li, which has a 10-year battery life. The 515 only has a 50-month battery life. Honestly, for a watch of this price, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect features like radio controlled timekeeping, maybe GPS controlled timekeeping, possibly Bluetooth connectivity for setting the date and time, and solar charging is something that's almost standard on G-Shock's, Seiko's and Citizen quartz watches in this price range and a lot less. Quartz technology is so far beyond what the Ronda 515 offers these days. Luminox really need to up the game here. Putting an $11 movement in a $700 watch for me is questionable, I have to say. A big thanks to Luminox for sending this watch in for review. I'd love to know what your thoughts are in the comments section. Does the Ronda 515 make you pause as it did me? I'm sure 99% of people buying this watch won't mind at all, but as I'm a watch geek, I'm firmly in that 1%.